Hello, everybody. It's Michael Hollands once again for Sound of the Movies. Today I have the pleasure to be joined by Andy Grush and Taylor Newton Stewart, the Newton brothers. On this episode, we will talk about their work with director Mike Flanagan on Midnight Mass, which is now available on Netflix. It is my pleasure to welcome the Newton brothers.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us, Michael.
It's great to have you on my show. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your schedule. I really appreciate that. Gentlemen, I would like to talk about the voice of horror. I mean, you've worked with director Mike Flanagan on quite a few projects. Dr. Sleep comes to mind, The Haunting of Hill House, The Haunting of Bly Manor, of course, and now Midnight Mass. And this show, of course, it's not necessarily about scares. It's about people. It's about faith, relationships, psychology is also very important. What can you tell me about this approach? Who would like to go first?
Um, I can start off. I mean, in regards to, the sound of horror, I think that something Taylor and I talk a lot about during the process of all of our projects that are horror related, is what's happening when there's not a genre scene happening, or when there's not horror happening, because uh the sum of those things lead up to the horror. But really, I think the horror is like a bigger part of the stories of everyone's lives. The characters in the shows and how that relates to viewers watching. And I think at least on our end, we try to take that into account and have a lot of discussions around what are the themes of the show, what are the characters, how do they live, what's their, on a very basic level. I mean, not trying to get into the psychology of characters, just on a real basic level. And then kind of exploring, what that means. And in the case of the projects with Mike, um, it's great because he will kind of, we'll go off and come up with ideas, and he'll then add to the process and help steer us and suggest things, or acknowledge this is working, this isn't. And it becomes very collaborative. So it's sort of a multi-tiered process. Taylor, what do you think?
I think I echo everything you just said. Absolutely. I think it's interesting. Just the genre right now is very exciting because I feel you can bring in a lot of people who like to see scary movies, who like to be scared. But with that, you can tell a story, and you can kind of, bring people into it and suck them in. And then when they kind of get attached to these characters and see these personalities, just like real life, you sort of relate, and it just, you start to feel things. And I think that's important when you can connect to something. And I think that's what Mike is just incredible at doing. He just connects you to these stories and draws you in. And as you said, Michael, to the different elements of life, and sort of this drama that happens. I feel like he just does that so well. And it's so much, as a composer, it's just so enjoyable to write music rather than just trying to scare someone, which is fun to do too, but just to kind of like, touch on the elements and the sort of the characters that they're unfolding to be sort of their arc in a story. And I love that. I love when we can do that, because it's kind of, you're playing like a drama in a horror, but maybe there's some sci-fi, or maybe there's some funny moments. It's a whole bunch of stuff.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for elaborating on that. And I find that very interesting because Mike Flanagan is not about cheap scares or jump scares. He's about storytelling, and that's what I enjoy in particular. He cares about characters, and he seems to map out everything so clearly and carefully. So I think that's a great inspiration also for you as a team.
Of course.
It is, yeah. And there's a lot of thought. I mean, Mike will Mike will prepare the shots for scenes months and months and months in advance. So he knows exactly what he's going to shoot and how he's going to edit it very early on, which is helpful because and those things, he adjusts those things as he goes. But for the most part, he has a pretty clear picture of what the story he wants to tell, and that's exciting for us because we can really, from the point of reading the scripts that he'll send us to executing the music, there's a lot of time to think about the stories and reflect on it, and as is the case with the viewers, it applies to us as well. It's these stories affect us all. We all take these stories in and think about them in our own headspace and how we relate to them. And Midnight Mass obviously did that to a huge extent. And I think there's not one person who watched Midnight Mass who didn't think about their own life.
Mike Flanagan initially wrote a novel on Midnight Mass, and which he intended to turn into a screenplay, and then eventually it was picked up by Netflix, who at first even turned it down, which I think happened in 2014. Did he already discuss certain aspects and ideas even back then when he wasn't exactly sure where things were going?
To my understanding, I mean, I know he's had this story for some time. He's written it. It's gone through many revisions, many different stages. But this is a very personal story to Mike, and I know he's had it with him for a long time. It's popped out in Gerald's Game. It's popped out in Hush. It's found its way into little places. He never elaborated on the specifics to us of what the story was about in any sort of detail. It was more of just like he would tell us a little bit about like, oh, it's so cool, this thing or that thing. And it would kind of be, we would just be like, oh, wow, this is really cool idea, it's very little, very, very subtle. I don't know too much about the logistics of buying and selling with Netflix. But I imagine anything that's not like, trying to jump in your seat, scare you, or that's overly commercial is probably harder to pitch than other things. But they've been super supportive of Mike, from what I can tell, with Midnight Mass. So I'm glad that they decided to, work that out with him. I'm sure they are too.
Great. And I would like to talk about the hymns, which were also performed during the mass, during the show to an extent. What can you tell me about the process of actually finding the appropriate music and as a result arranging the songs and the hymns for the show? How did you choose?
A lot of the hymns Mike had in the script. And there were specific hymns that, hey, I want this hymn here. And there were a handful of hymns that we sort of came up with. I grew up Catholic. I went to basically Catholic kindergarten through undergraduate in college. So we kind of contributed a few ideas to the hymns after we'd kind of gone through what was going to be in there. And then we needed some more hymns. So we kind of came up with some ideas. And when it came to the arranging, it was very important to Mike that these hymns be, the word that I was using with the singers every time we would sort of have these remote sessions with them is that, we need you to sing humbly, which has a lot baked into it. We wanted performances that weren't, because we were using a lot of excellent singers who are pro singers, and some singers who are not pro singers. And we did that by design to achieve sort of a sound that sounds like what Crockett Island is, or would be, or was, or whatever context it would be in. Because, you don't want to have these huge, elaborate hymns that sound beautiful, but you also don't want them to sound bad. You want them to just be humble and sincere. And the sincerity was the most important part of the hymns. There's a big thing for me with music, just songs, is whether or not I believe you or not, when I hear a song. And these hymns, it was important to Taylor and I that these hymns were believable to everyone. So when you hear it, you don't feel like we're trying to manipulate something or do something, which we were not. We're just trying to, the hymns are beautifully written. So when it came to arranging it, we arranged it in that way. We would arrange it in sometimes the traditional key and sometimes not the traditional key, just depending on sort of what the range was and what we were trying to achieve. There's one of the hymns is pretty obscure. It's called "Come Darkness," and it was important that was going to sit under a lot of dialogue. So we wanted to make sure that it was, low and quiet and soft, and so that is in a key that sort of represents that, like the lowest register of all four of the parts. I think even the bass, I don't even think I think the bass might have even ended up being too low. But for all the hymns, it was important to arrange them based on what was happening in the scene so that it was appropriate to what was being shot, or in what case was being scored.
Great, thank you. And that's very interesting because I think preparing the vocal sessions could have or might have posed a challenge, as you needed to make up your mind as to how, let's say, forceful they should be or how quiet they should be, because I think you can communicate a lot by just being silent and delicate and still have a great vocal arrangement. So I think that was crucial also to the scenes.
Yeah, there were a lot. So I don't mean to jump in, Taylor. I was just going to bring up, just because there was there were a lot of hymns actually where we had to do a lot of versions for exactly that reason, Michael. Like, we would record what we thought was a humble sound, and as we'd, be putting it up to picture, or we'd get tracks back, it would sound too good, too big, too quiet, too soft, like there was a lot of, each hymn probably, we probably recorded 10 versions of every hymn at least, just to try and get sort of the right key, the right vibe, the right tempo even. The hymns that are sung on camera had to be set up to a click track, but we're pretty click track avert. Like, Taylor and I don't really enjoy click tracks as far as like a steady tempo. So what we would do is we would record our own pass. We would sing the hymn, just the melody line, and then beat map a tempo to that melody line, and then sing all the parts to that, and then use that beat mapped tempo that's sort of changing as the tempo that the cast would then hear and sing to, so that you would feel that there was a natural ebb and flow, which there is when you're at church. No one's singing to a perfect grid, and so it was important that none of the hymns were to a perfect grid. So it was a bit of a process. It was 18 months of hymns basically.
Great, thank you, Andy. And of course, you needed to, let's say, also score the isolation and the seclusion of the characters. We are, after all, talking about a very tiny island, and it's about faith, it's about humanity, and also about redemption, which I think sums up perfectly what the character Riley Flynn is going through, because he went back after having spent a considerable amount of time in prison. So what can you tell me about this process and the balance of finding just the right key there?
Yeah, I think the way that Mike tells stories, the characters are so strong, and the storytelling is so strong that it's easy to have music get in the way and sort of take away from what's happening. So we kind of walk that line very delicately. And I think for this particular story, we really wanted to have sort of this nervousness and stress, and play more on this uncomfortableness that is happening, kind of like the way the ocean is slowly moving. The music was never consistent. It was always inconsistent, this particular piece that we played for that. And then we sort of wanted then this music that represented that faith and the belief and kind of believing in something and the power of that idea. And so, Riley obviously is in a lot of ways, I feel like representing the viewer in so many ways. He's coming in, he's sort of, what is this? What's happening? I don't believe this. And then he's slowly starting to like kind of wanting to believe it. And then does he believe? Like, it's just, it plays with that for a bit. And I think the music was able to sort of also play with that tension, mixing with that sort of belief of faith. And I think that's what we use musically. And it allowed for a lot of swells and moments of stillness, and then kind of come back in with that lurking tension. And it ended up working out.
Andy, you had a cameo in the series, even as the the church organ player, and there's an interesting Mike Flanagan quote which I found, in which he says, "I really loved seeing Andy sitting there freezing his ass off at 3:30 in the morning with hour-long suffering actors." I mean, of course, being given this chance also probably added lots of authenticity as you got to watch everything up close. What do you think about that?
It did 1,000%. Yeah, and he's right. There is a very visceral reality to 3:30 in the morning, and it's 36 degrees and raining, and you're standing around waiting for the next shot. Strangely, that was a lot of fun to me, and it was also very informative. I would rap with Taylor after I go to bed at 7 o'clock in the morning and sleep for a few hours. I download to Taylor sort of what was going on, just sort of the scenery and how it felt, because that came into play at a certain point when we got into some of the more interesting score. We wanted to make sure we were representing again, Crockett Island, and that the score sounded like Crockett Island, but puts you in that space, because everyone in Midnight Mass, cast and crew, we're all very diligent about being involved in the island and having their characters have interesting stories. I mean, even Wade Scarborough, who was played by Michael Trucco, you'll notice in one of the episodes he shakes hands with Father Paul with his left hand because of a condition that he's got. It's just all these interesting little stories that everyone sort of was very good about being very involved in the island. And that came into play when we got into the score. I think that it was helpful to have had the experience of being up there for 4 months and being, freezing my ass off at 3:30 in the morning with the cast, because it really, it informed what Crockett Island is, even though we're making a show, but still I think that there's a real experience that comes from being there and being hands-on with things that are happening. It was an excellent experience.
Great. Thank you very much. So needless to say, you told Taylor about the set experience and what went on there. So I think, Taylor, this was a, let's say, perfect opportunity, I reckon, for you to start working on some musical ideas.
Yeah. We, a lot of things were morphing and changing as Andy was on the set here. And also to, as degrees of density of singers. And as we were talking earlier, how they were singing also would just get sort of dialed in a bit more, and it was nice to help with that. I remember singing like one of the hymns, I don't know, like 35-40 times, just all the parts and layering and layering and layering. And some of the hymns are just they're very long, and so I would start to feel like my voice was gone and start to be like, oh. And then I would talk to Andy, and his voice was gone because he was singing on, he was on the set talking all day, and then he would go back to his room at the hotel, and he would sing there too. He was always singing, like in the car, like everywhere. So he lost his voice, and it was real fun. But Yeah, it was great to sort of have the, one of us here, and have him there working. And we also had a really great team behind us, from our mixer to our music editor to the music supervisors. They were all just it really, dialed in, which helped make things go smooth. Because, when you're on the set, there's not really a lot of time for trying to figure that stuff out, because they have to go, they have to hit the mark, and it's all timed. So it's very, it can be very stressful if it's not done right.
Absolutely. Thank you, Taylor. And when you were ultimately working on the show together, did you like to work on many scenes simultaneously so you can get to pick which version you think might work best?
I think we were working out of necessity, because I think that the way Taylor and I were approaching Midnight Mass was less episodic and more like a, 7 hour movie. Um, Even though it is very well defined and broken up episodically, for us on the music side, it was helpful to sort of embrace the big picture and then uh, score scenes around that. Like a big scene score wise was the beach scene that happens at the beginning of episode 2. Um, there's a lot to unpack in that scene. You're kind of wondering what's happened. Why are these cats on the beach? And there's, the dialogue with everyone from town is sort of indicative of who these characters are. You're learning who the characters are, and it's brilliantly shot. I mean, Mike and Michael Famignari have the cameras like in these oneer shots, like just moving around characters as they act out the scene. And that was I think important for us to then apply that to other scenes, not the exact score, but the sounds of what that was. And that's of course just one. I'm just using that one scene as an example, but there were many others that sort of applied that way. And then we would sort of think in bigger picture, like what does this represent, and where else is this occurring, and at what scale is it occurring? How big should it be? How small should it be? That sort of thing.
I would like to talk about, let's say, simplicity versus complexity. I mean, sometimes I think it's really hard to determine when it's most appropriate to write something which is complex, lavish, and versus a theme or motif which is, let's say, or which consists of just the basic notes. I noticed there is a tiny motif which is recurring. It basically indicates something peculiar is about to happen or is happening right at this very moment. So, what can you tell me about this approach, finding the right notes or the amount of notes for the score?
I think, we have ideas we try obviously early on, melodically, texture wise, to find what we think will work. And often it's to the script before we ever see anything. In this case, because Andy was up there, we were writing ideas from the moment he was up there to the time he got back. And, we tried several things that were working, some weren't. But I think at the end of it all, it's like, how does it make you feel? What is it doing? And how does Mike feel when he watches it too? What does it make him feel? So we kind of go through that process. And in the end, we sort of had, again, a lot of this nervousness, this tension that we were building. And then we had a couple of melodic pieces that was to convey, again, more of a belief system sort of. And I think that was the shift between the two that we were approaching. And often too, when you have a relationship with a director, what their tastes are. And I think early on we might throw some crazy stuff at the directors, the producers we're working with. But interestingly enough, in the end, it kind of hones back to the taste of their style, and I find that I find that fascinating, but it makes 100% sense because, you know, you're a small little piece in this picture that's being created. And so with Mike, you know, it needs to be approached, and on that particular show, very, very tastefully, very, very specific. And a lot of times in this case, it meant simple, it meant simplicity. And I think the complexity went into some of the sounds we were using, or maybe we could get away with it a little bit more complex on a couple arrangements, but the melody and the, you know, the sort of structure was all pretty simple.
And that's also very interesting because the story unfolds, let's say, quietly. The same could be applied when you're describing the music. It becomes more tense toward, let's say, episode number 4 and 5, and the whole show is comprised of 7 episodes, and you're dealing with many interesting characters. I mean, there is the, let's say, religious fanatics and a very overzealous person such as Beth Keane. Then you have the enigmatic and also very charismatic priest Paul Hill. And there's a lot going on, actually, throughout the show. And you see a transformation of the characters, a rejuvenation also. I mean, for instance, Dr. Sarah Gunning's mother later on looks younger than her than her daughter. Actually, everything after all this, let's say, chaos and mischief, and when people are being transformed. So that's really great storytelling, and I think it offers you so much as a writing team to support that.
It really does. It really does, and it's, you know, it's obviously a huge team sport. You know, to Taylor's point earlier, you know, we're just a small part of the whole, you know, machine, and to be given this sort of canvas of information and story and characters and, you know, everything, makeup, stunts, all the things, to be given that canvas to you know, write music with, I don't want to say for or on top of or behind, like with, it all kind of comes together. And I think that played a part in sort of also what Taylor was saying about, you know, we had some score that was very sparse and out there. We had one cue that was 7 minutes long and it has one piano note in it, you know, and that was very much by design. And all of it is to not get in the way, you know, not to instruct. I mean, we've talked with Mike about this on all the projects we've worked on with him. And that's not to point a finger at anything, not like, this is going to be scary, that was scary, you should feel sad, you should do this. It's more to just do what the lighting does, do what the costumes are doing, do what the makeup is doing, do what the characters are doing, what the story, you know, just be a part of it so that there's not, you know, you're not feeling noticed. And a lot of that was like not performing too many notes, just from a physical standpoint early on in the show, you know, let people wonder what's going on, not feel, because music can be comforting. Even if music is dark, I think if there's a tempo to it, it's consistent. It's if there's something constantly happening, it's comforting, even if it's dark. Whereas if you feel off kilter, there's no tempo, you feel, I think it provides a sense of curiosity, and oftentimes in this case, sort of a dark curiosity, which is, you know, what I think what all of us were going for.
Yes, thank you. And of course, it's about exploring characters and also following the narrative for which Mike created. And at a certain, or after a certain period of time, he unleashed the horror, and the tension rose gradually, so it can actually match the progression of the story. And it's also, I think, essential not to be too, let's say, or to not put too much emphasis on the score, not to be too, let's say, overbearing, not to have the score sound like too forceful, if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. I mean, all those things were very much that way. We played on, this is also during COVID, so it was a little difficult trying to get a lot of musicians at the time to do a bunch of stuff in a short period of time. There were some moments where we had to turn around things very, very quickly. And we ended up just playing it ourselves, everything from cello and, piano and all kinds of things. And interestingly enough, we're not great cello players, but because we sort of have this, the way we play it and the tension and the sort of style, it sort of gave it its own character and its own sound to where we didn't end up re-recording some of it. We ended up just going with it, and it just it kind of added to the show and what it was, sort of the imperfection and tension of what was happening. And it was funny because it was that way with voices too. There were scenes where we would have to start out imperfect with the choir, and then slowly, as it was taking on movement with the camera, it would become more perfect. And it was fun. It was fun to do that kind of stuff. I mean, probably Andy was working super duper late, long hours, but but it was good. It was good for Timmy.
There was actually a great execution that Mike, it was just beautiful the way he did this. Holy, Holy, Holy starts as a source hymn. You hear it in church, I believe, and then it turns into score. So
Yep.
it kind of evolves from this sort of broken down, like not broken down, but just a very humble performance to a much more beautiful performance and filled out performance. And it morphs through several scenes. It's just a brilliant idea by Flanagan again.
Yes, absolutely. And that's, I think, essential, to have a good collaboration. And it's so important for a director to know that he's in good hands, and also vice versa, of course. And there's a quote which I would also like to read. And you said, and Mike always encourages us that even if we do something terrible, he knows that's sort of part of the process. And that's interesting because I think you have to let your collaborators know that they are a bit off base, quote unquote, and that it's also okay to miss in order to succeed eventually.
I was gonna say no, 100%. I think by actually taking that, going that, I think Andy, you've said this before, by going that distance, by going all the way, you discover things along the way that maybe you wouldn't have if you were being too cautious and too careful. And I think with a new relationship, you're trying to find quickly, where that line is, how far can you push it? And it does take some comfort and trust in that. And I think it's important for collaborators to allow artists to take it to that extent, to see, because amazing things can be discovered along the way that you didn't know. Like, we this whole time we were thinking we were going to make this piano score, but no, it sounds so much better arranged on, a quartet. Like it all these different things unfold, and it's helpful to have that. And I find that a lot of composers who are new on a project, they're a little more cautious, rightfully so, because maybe the guy before them had been fired, or who knows, that they don't feel comfortable in pushing that envelope and seeing how far it can go. But I do think it's important to give it a shot. And I feel like we're very lucky with Mike that he trusts us to take it to that extent.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And it's hard to sometimes to play in that sandbox because you're limited by time and oftentimes resources. And you want to get the job done, but you want to try to never be in a place where you're living in the, hey, we want it to have the same aesthetic as this movie or this TV show or this song, or, those are easy things to do. Those are easy targets to hit. And there are a lot of projects that's all they want. Like, hey, this show or this movie or this pop artist was very successful. Can you just do that, but sound different for our show? And I think that's a big creative failure, like most of the time. You know, you want to create something unique, and it's hard, and you need someone like, you know, Mike Flanagan and Trevor Macy, who sort of allow you to like give you some leeway to like, hey, go do what you guys do, you know. And it's a lot of fun because it's easy to come up with the safe approach, you know, like, oh, hey, like, you know, midnight mass, like, let's just have organs as the score the whole time because it's a church, or let's just have, you know, a cappella vocals the whole time, or let, you know, it's, those are easy sort of approaches. But to
Yeah.
lean into whatever project it is, even if it's a comedy, to lean into an idea that's not normal is usually not really easily digested. And it's, you know, it just becomes less creative. So in the case of Mike and Trevor, they give us a lot of room to attempt to be creative. That's not to say we always get there, but they at least let us try, you know, some ideas. And it's fun. It makes it fun for us too, right, Taylor? I mean, we can like get real wacky with some ideas, and most of the time the wacky ideas will not land, but it is a lot of fun to try them.
I mean, to be fair too, we test a lot of ideas before it hits their ears. So, you know, we try a lot of stuff before it ever gets out. Thankfully, no one hears anything until it leaves. But it's nice to have that. I think it just makes it more creative, and you have to take sort of leaps and try things, or else you're not pushing the envelope. And I think it's important to take that if you can.
And to Taylor's point, Taylor, you said this, like, we usually find things that we don't expect. It's not what you think is going to work that usually ends up working. You have to kind of, I think, be open to like letting, at least as composers, letting our minds like be malleable to like, okay, we're going to record a quartet, you know, and we book a studio and book a quartet and get the music written, and everyone starts performing. And at the end of one take, someone accidentally hits their music stand with a bow, you know, and sometimes the entire quartet session might not work, but that bow sound running through one of Taylor's ridiculous modular icons in the back, like, will sound interesting, you know?
Yes, thank you very much for elaborating on that. And I think it's very important to have trust in a collaboration. I mean, after all, you know, Mike Flanagan hires you for a reason. So I think it wouldn't be the way to go to just take the easy way out and say, well, this is what I like, just copy, you know, or here's a piece of temp music, just do what somebody else did. I don't think this necessarily works, because you need to be creative. And even if there is a time crunch, it's important to work on something and to experiment and to find a common ground. And I think you've done just that with him, and also vice versa. So of course, congratulations on your great collaboration. And gentlemen, is there anything else you would like to add about Mike Flanagan, about Midnight Mass, about your collaboration? Anything else that comes to mind?
Just that, you know, I don't know if all the viewers know, but just the project was just very, very close to Mike's heart, this project. And you know, if you go to Mike's Twitter account, you can see he you know, all the different things he said about the project and things he's mentioned. And I don't know, whenever you're working on something that's super, you know, near and dear to someone, when they put a lot into it, you yourself don't, you know, you want to do the best job you can, make it the most exceptional piece of art you can. And I think working on this project with Mike, we really were trying to push to make it as, you know, as great as it can be. And it was just very rewarding, sort of, you know, to see all the viewers respond and connect to sort of the story, and obviously to work with Mike and all the team. And I just think that if anyone wants to know more details, I think they should just, you know, go to Mike's Twitter page and check it out, because there's some really sort of Easter eggs and cool stuff in the show.
Yeah, it's September 23rd of 2021 was the day Mike put out a tweet that's it's anyone who enjoyed Midnight Mass and didn't see that tweet, you should go check it out. September 23rd, he put out a really nice tweet about the process and what the project meant to him.
Gentlemen, thank you so very much for taking so much time out of your schedule again. I really loved the conversation. I hope you enjoyed it too.
We did.
We
Thanks
did.
a lot, Michael.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time. And again, thank you for working with us on schedule. Sorry we had to move around so much.
No problem at all. No worries. Thank you, Taylor. Thank you, Andy. It was a blast, and I'm looking forward to chatting again down the road.
Sounds good.
Likewise, Michael. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Michael.
Bye.
Bye-bye.